The chandelier light pooled like liquid gold across a grand hotel ballroom, catching on crystal flutes and mirrored walls while a quartet rehearsed a gentle waltz. Staff moved with choreographed precision, steady and hushed, the way a clock's inner gears keep time out of sight. Outside, rain braided silver lines down floor-to-ceiling windows, the city beyond a mosaic of neon and wet asphalt. Then the elevator doors parted like stage curtains and a voice cut through the room, cool and decisive. "Call off the party," the CEO demanded. The music stopped mid-note. 100 glances tilted toward a woman in a tailored charcoal suit, her hair swept into an immaculate knot, a storm concealed behind calm eyes that missed nothing. Down on the service drive behind the ballroom, a white van eased into the narrow space between dumpsters and loading pallets. A single Dadmark Ellis killed the engine and sat there for a breath, hands loose on the wheel, the rain drumming the roof like a heartbeat he didn't quite trust. In the passenger seat, an 8-year-old girl hugged a cake box to her chest as if it were rare and fragile, as if it could answer questions she didn't know how to ask. Sophie had insisted on writing the message herself, each letter careful and a little crooked, a sugar-scripted hope. Mark met her eyes in the dim light, a smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. "Ready?" She nodded, serious the way kids get when they're trying to be brave for you. Inside, servers were extinguishing candles, swapping linen table numbers for storage crates, sweeping away the evidence of a celebration that wouldn't be allowed to happen. A family name curled in gold foil across the entrance arch, a promise suddenly withdrawn. If you've ever wondered how one small act can cross the distance between strangers and change the direction of a night, stay with me. Because a single cake carried by a man doing his best was about to walk straight into a room where love, money, and pride had stopped speaking to each other. And nothing about this family would be the same again. The service corridor smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and damp cardboard, a narrow artery pulsing toward the heart of the hotel. Mark balanced the cake against his forearm, the white box pressed to the gray of his t-shirt. His other hand curved over Sophie's small shoulder as they turned into the back-of-house vestibule. A banquet manager in a headset spotted them and lifted a palm, apology already forming. "I'm sorry, the event has been canceled." His voice tried for gentle, landed on efficient. "I got the call while I was driving," Mark said. "We're already here, it's just one cake." He peeled back the box lid for a second, and the sweet smell of buttercream slipped into the fluorescent light. A simple, round, piped edges like a lace collar, and in the middle, Sophie's careful message. "For all of us." The manager hesitated. He had seen too many nights like this, plans scrapped, money to be moved, hurt disguised as logistics. He gestured toward the main hall. "Talk to Ms. Vale." They followed him through a set of double doors that opened into a ballroom mid-unraveling. Stems of lilies leaned in metal bins. A florist clipped ribbon off centerpieces with the sleepy focus of someone trying not to think. In the center of the room stood the woman who had stopped the music, her posture so still it radiated motion. Elena Vale didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She was the quiet at the center of a storm that knew exactly where each gust would land. "Ms. Vale," the manager said, tone shifting to careful deference. "The baker. He's already on site." Her gaze found them and held. Up close, she was younger than the title suggested, or perhaps age-proofed by precision. Minimal makeup, nothing out of place except the weary crease at the corner of her mouth. She looked first at the cake, then at Sophie, and the smallest flicker crossed her eyes. Something like a memory interrupted. "We canceled," she said. "Not unkind, just final." "I can take it back," Mark answered. "But it won't keep. I thought maybe someone who worked here could take it home. It's paid for." His words were plain, no edge, and he meant them. The box made a quiet sound when he shifted his grip, the way soft cardboard sighs. Sophie stepped forward before Mark could stop her. "We made it extra careful," she told Elena, both hands on the box as if she could steady adults more than frosting. "It's vanilla. My mom liked vanilla." She blinked, the confession arriving without plan, then added in a rush that was both apology and offering. "She died, but we still have cake on the days that are supposed to be happy." For a moment, the ballroom's noise receded. The florist paused mid-snipped. The quartet members gathered their sheet music more slowly. Elena's eyes shifted to Sophie's face, not with the stiff politeness adults give children in passing, but with an attention that had weight. "What's your name?" she asked. "Sophie Ellis," the girl said. "This is my dad. He's the best at making promises he can keep." A ghost of a smile touched Mark's mouth, surprised and proud. He glanced at the ornate arch at the ballroom entrance, the family name gilded across it like a verdict. Vale. He didn't know these people. He only knew he'd spent the afternoon stirring batter while his daughter sat at the counter, swinging her legs, whispering the words she wanted to write until she was brave enough to pipe them. Elena nodded once, a decision of inches. "Bring it here," she said softly. They set the cake on a half-cleared table. Lights from the chandeliers fractured in the plastic window of the box lid and fell across the frosting like broken stars. Elena read the message. Her throat moved, and when she spoke, the command was gone from her voice, replaced by something careful. "For all of us," she repeated, as if testing whether the sentence could hold. The banquet manager shifted his feet. "We can send staff home, or we can repurpose. Give me a minute," Elena said, not looking away from the cake. Then to Sophie, "Your writing is beautiful. Did you choose the words?" Sophie nodded. "Sometimes when people are mad, they forget they belong together. My dad says belonging is what you do, not just who you are." Elena's hands were steady on the table's edge, but her eyes gave her away. A flicker toward the empty head table. The cluster of unlit candles. The single-framed photograph waiting to be placed. A younger Elena with 2 boys and an older woman, all summer squinting into sunlight. She exhaled, long and quiet. "Maybe we should light one," she said. "Just one." Mark didn't speak. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a book of matches clipped with a bakery logo. Sophie clapped once, small and sincere, then caught herself and folded her hands. Elena leaned closer, and in that small circle of people, a wick took fire. It danced without asking permission, a thin ribbon of gold threading its way up into the stillness. And in the reflection on the cake box window, 3 faces hovered together. The woman who had canceled a party, the man who didn't know this family, and the child who had found a bridge. The little candle trembled, a slender flame holding its ground in a room that had run out of reasons. Elena gestured toward a smaller anteroom off the ballroom glass walls, a long console table, rain stippling the window panes like soft static. "Let's talk here," she said, her voice quieter now, a step down from command into confession. The door hushed shut behind them, leaving the bustle to fade into a distant, harmless noise. Mark set the cake down. When he eased the lid back, the fragrance of vanilla and sugar settled into the air, the way memories settle when you stop resisting them. Sophie stood between them, chin lifted, a mediator without knowing it. Elena reached for a linen napkin as if she needed something to hold that wasn't the past. "We ordered 8 cakes," she said, a dry smile that didn't reach her eyes. "One for each table. It felt appropriate." She exhaled, then shook her head as if the idea of appropriate had turned brittle in her mouth. But there's no point in pretending a party is a party when half the family refuses to be in the same room. "How long has it been since you were?" Mark asked, careful not to push. Elena's gaze drifted to the photograph she'd carried in herself, tucked near the entrance, waiting to be placed on an easel. A younger version of her stared out, summer warm and unarmored, flanked by 2 teenage boys who looked like the same person turning his head. An older woman held the trio with her hands at their shoulders. Posture tall, smile regal, a matriarch who had always understood the camera. "Before my father died," Elena said. 6 months. The hospital smelled like boiled sheets and old lemons. We promised him we'd keep the company and the family intact. We kept one of those. Mark didn't say he understood. He let the space agree for him. Sophie's fingers had found the corner of the cake board and were tapping a gentle rhythm, as if coaxing courage into the room. "My grandma says promises are like roses," she offered, unprompted. "Pretty, but they need thorns to stay alive." Elena managed a small laugh. "Your grandma is wise." The laugh died as quickly as it came. She looked at the rain. "I stepped into his chair 3 weeks after the funeral. The boardroom smelled like lacquer and fear. My brothers think I stole the life our father intended for them. They want their shares now in cash. They've stopped answering my mother's calls. We're a family of actors auditioning for the part of Together. Tonight was supposed to fix the optics. I decided not to perform. She lifted her shoulders, a motion that might have been defiance if it hadn't been so fragile. So, call off the party. Mark's hands had flower scars along the knuckles' tiny map lines of a life measured in repetitions. He rubbed his thumb over one of them and found the words he kept in a separate pocket from pride. I used to do overnight shifts at the distribution center, he said. Forklifts and cold air and a clock that never stopped humming. When Sophie's mom got sick, I changed shifts, then changed jobs. We thought we'd beat it. When we didn't, I learned how to make the cake she loved. Because birthdays kept coming whether we were ready or not. He glanced at Sophie, who was watching him like a lighthouse watches its keeper. The bakery wasn't a dream. It was a way to stand close to the days that mattered and still pay the rent. I don't know a lot about boardrooms. I do know a table means nothing if the people around it are hungry for the wrong things. Elena's eyes flicked to the cake again, to the words in Sophie's neat, brave hand. For all of us. She swallowed hard and something in her face adjusted a fraction, but enough to notice. My mother loves appearances, she said. She says you owe your last name your best posture. It kept us safe and shiny for a long time. Now it keeps us apart. I told the PR team to postpone the press. I told the florist to hold. I told the quartet they could go home. Her mouth curled, self-reproach or self-protection, even she didn't seem sure. And then I stood in the middle of the room and felt 12 years old. What happened when you were 12? Sophie asked, the question landing like a breeze that moves a heavy curtain. Elena blinked at the frankness, then let the answer arrive. My father missed my piano recital. The company was on fire, he said. My mother told me to smile for the donors afterward. I played anyway. I can still feel how hard my hands shook on the keys, how loud the silence felt in the seat he paid for, but never filled. I promised myself I would never ask anyone to smile through a lie. She met Mark's eyes. Tonight was the first time I kept that promise in public. It doesn't feel like victory. Mark nodded. Real things rarely do at first. He gestured to the candle they'd set on a side plate, its flame steadying as the air settled. You lit one. That's a start. Elena looked at the tiny light as if it were a negotiator she could trust. If they came, she said softly, I wouldn't know what to say to them. My brothers? My mother? She hesitated, then added, like a confession to a priest she didn't believe in. I am very tired of being right and still losing. Sophie nudged the cake forward an inch, an 8-year-old's version of pushing a bridge into place. You could say, there's one cake, let's share it. She stared up at Elena, eyes clear. Sometimes you only need one to start. Elena's answer was a breath that trembled and then landed. Sometimes, she repeated, trying the word on as if it might fit. Outside, the rain eased, as if the sky itself had decided to listen. Inside the glass room, 3 people stood in a triangle around a simple cake, each of them holding a different piece of the same ache. And across the ballroom, unseen for now, a phone began to buzz. The buzz became a chorus. Elena's phone lit like a lighthouse in fog, then a harsher sound cut through the glass room. Heels striking marble, decisive and rapid. The door slid open before anyone knocked. A woman in a navy sheath dress entered with the kind of grace that announces itself as lineage. Pearl earrings, a silk scarf tied with nautical precision, a face arranged into sympathy that could pivot to strategy without moving a single muscle. Elena, she said, explain. Mother, Elena answered, the words softening her posture by a fraction. I canceled. Margaret Vale's eyes tracked the candle, the lonely cake, the girl standing like a small diplomat at a high-stakes summit. She flicked a glance at Mark and logged him under staff until the details refused to stay put. And who is this? The baker, Elena said, and his daughter. Of course. Margaret turned to her daughter again. You canceled the celebration on the night we invited the board, the partners, the press? Do you intend to write a check to every investor who interprets this as instability? The temperature in her tone never changed. It didn't have to. Before Elena could answer, another door opened. Daniel and Logan arrived with the kinetic energy of men who had sprinted through rain and outrage. The brothers wore suits that fit like resentments, expensive and slightly too tight across the shoulders. Daniel clocked the single cake and grinned with a cruelty that called itself humor. Well, this is on brand. Minimalism masquerading as virtue. Logan looked at his sister, then at the candle. Something like grief flickered and hid. You didn't have the right to cancel without consulting us, he said, quieter than Daniel but shaking with the suspicion of betrayal. Dad wanted... Harris, the CFO, slipped in behind them with a tablet tucked like a shield and a voice tuned to corporate alarm. The press is already in the lobby. If they smell blood, this becomes a governance story by morning. We should proceed with a scaled program, a united photo, 2 speeches. It will read as reflection, not retreat. He cut a glance at Mark and Sophie as if they were typos. Elena stood very still. I won't stage a family that doesn't exist. You don't have that luxury, Margaret replied, turning toward the window where the ballroom glittered with unlit promise. Your father built a company. Your job is to keep it from catching fire in public. Daniel pulled a folded document from his inside pocket and let it breathe on the console table, close enough to the cake to crowd it. Logan and I are calling an emergency vote, he announced. No confidence in Elena's leadership, effective immediately. Board signatures by morning. We move forward with a buyout of our shares, or we go to the press with your unilateral decisions and the way you've frozen our inheritance. Sophie's hand, reaching for a paper plate, hovered in the air and then drew back as if she'd been asked to leave a room where adults had forgotten how to be gentle. Mark took a breath he didn't fully trust and kept his voice even. If we're in the way, we can go. We just didn't want good food to go to waste. You'll stay, Elena said, and it came out a plea that sounded like a command. Please. She looked at her family. There won't be a photo tonight. There will be a conversation, on or off camera. But if you want a speech, here it is. I'm done asking everyone to smile through a lie. Harris shifted into a tone that often closed deals. The world doesn't reward authenticity, it rewards stability. If you won't produce the appearance of unity, at least control the narrative. A canceled party is a story. A private dinner is a pause. Margaret stepped closer to the cake, read the words in careful frosting, and exhaled as if she'd been offered a bribe she wanted to refuse. For all of us, she read. Who is us anymore? The question wasn't cruel so much as exhausted, a woman stranded at the border between image and truth. Daniel's mouth twisted. Us is whoever signs the checks, he said. He reached for the box lid as if to close it, to declare the night over with a cardboard silencing. Sophie edged forward, small and steady. Please don't, she said. It's not finished. Logan looked at her, then at Elena. The old impulse to be kind fought with a newer habit of keeping score. Do you really think a cake fixes a decade? He asked, and it broke a little on the way out. No, Mark said. He surprised himself by stepping nearer, palms open, as if approaching a skittish animal. Cakes don't fix things, they mark them. You don't have to be ready for forever. You just have to be ready for a slice. He glanced at Elena for permission. She gave the smallest nod and he reached into the box for the knife, metal flashing under the chandelier light. Harris clicked his tongue. This is not the time for sentiment. It's exactly the time, Elena countered, and the muscles along her jaw softened, as if she'd decided she could stand to be vulnerable in front of people who might not deserve it. If we can't share one thing without negotiating terms, then the company is already broken in ways a press release can't repair. The ballroom doors opened again, this time to a pair of security staff with radios at their shoulders and faces arranged into neutral. Margaret didn't look at them. She felt them the way a conductor senses a missed note. No one is being removed, she said sharply, and the men retreated to the threshold to become furniture again. Daniel tapped the paper with a manicured nail. 9 a.m., he said. We force the vote. You can choose to salvage your dignity tonight by doing the photo, or you can wake up to headlines that make it impossible to hold your chair. Elena reached for the candle and cupped the air around it with her hand, not touching the flame, only sheltering it, the way you hold breath for a diver you love. I'm not trading a picture for my place, she said. I'm deciding whether my place is worth the picture. Mark held the knife still over the cake, waiting. Sophie touched her father's wrist, then looked up at the grown-ups whose future sat like an unopened letter between them. Outside, the rain slowed to a fine whisper. Inside, the night drew a line no one could ignore. Harris angled the tablet so the blue-white glow turned the room a shade colder. The press requests a statement in 5. Our options are a short photo call or a written note. No questions. Decide. Elena's eyes moved from the screen to the single candle as if calibrating two very different forms of light. Daniel folded his arms, the vote papers a threat disguised as stationery. Logan held himself like a man trying not to remember something kind. Margaret stood between them all, immaculate, exhausted, a compass that had spun too long. Harris reached for his checkbook voice. "And you," he said to Mark, brisk in the way some people get when they suspect anyone's sincerity but their own. "Thank you for your time. Accounting will arrange payment. If you'd leave the cake, we'll repurpose it for the shot." Mark met the CFO's stare, then looked at Sophie, who was watching him with that lighthouse gaze again. He thought of hospital monitors and the sudden quiet when it's all over. Of the first year he cut cake at a table with one chair that would never be filled again. He put the knife down deliberately. "I won't sell my daughter's handwriting," he said. "We brought this for people, not pictures. If you need a cake for optics, I can box this back up and take it home." Harris bristled. "You're grandstanding." "No," Mark said, and his voice didn't rise. "I'm parenting. She'll remember what I did here long after your headline is gone." Sophie's chin lifted, a small, proud echo. Elena's mouth softened as if something in her bones recognized the weight of a choice made for the right audience. Daniel laughed, sharp enough to nick skin. "This is absurd. We're negotiating with a baker." He turned to leave. "I'll bring the press in myself." Mark stepped half a pace, not blocking, only placing himself where Daniel had to see him to pass. "I don't work here," he said, calm but immovable. "I can't tell you what to do. But before you bring strangers into a room where your mother is about to break, ask yourself what story they'll tell you back tomorrow. If it's one you can live with, go to buy." Daniel flinched, the way people do when a question finds the exact bruise. Logan's jaw worked. He looked at Margaret and then away quickly, the way a son does when he knows his mother is steel and glass at the same time. Elena set her palms on the console table as if it were a piano bench she was claiming again after years of standing. When she spoke, her words were not a performance. They were breath finally given permission to sound like itself. "We're not doing a photo," she said. "We're not issuing a statement about unity we don't have. I'm going to the ballroom, and I'm going to tell the press, thank you for coming, and that the event is postponed. Then I'm turning off the microphones. If that costs me my chair, I will survive that truth better than I can survive another picture of us lying." Harris opened his mouth. Margaret closed her eyes, a single second of surrender, then steadied. "Elena," she murmured, half warning, half wonder. Elena lifted her gaze to her mother. "You taught me posture," she said, and the tenderness didn't dull the point, it made it precise. "I'm grateful. Tonight I need a spine." She turned to Mark. "Will you bring the cake?" It was not a command, it was an invitation. He nodded. "On one condition," he said, looking at the people who were almost a family, and the people who might still decide to be. "Before anyone gets a slice, they say one true thing they can stand by tomorrow. Nothing that punishes someone else. Just one truth they'll still recognize in daylight. If we can't do that, we don't deserve cake." Sophie smiled, small and fierce. Margaret looked at the cake and then at the daughter she had trained for boardrooms and debutante photographs. Something shifted in her face, not defeat, not exactly acquiescence, more like grief meeting courage halfway. "I will serve it," she said, surprising herself with the simplicity of the vow. "If you hand me the knife." Mark slid the knife across the table. "It's yours to decide who eats." They moved together, not harmonious but willing. The doors to the ballroom opened, and the space beyond seemed to inhale them. Chandeliers dimmed to a late supper glow, centerpieces waiting like guests who hadn't given up hope yet, staff standing uncertain at the margins. At the far end, a cluster of cameras angled for a shot they would not get. Elena walked to the threshold where the press had gathered and held up a hand. "Thank you for coming," she said, voice steady, no mic needed. "Our family is not ready to celebrate tonight. The event is postponed. There will be no photo call." A dozen questions flicked into the air like knives thrown for sport. She didn't catch any. "Good night." She turned away from the lenses, not with contempt, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had chosen which audience mattered. Harris pinched the bridge of his nose, already drafting damage control that read like dignity. Daniel stood rigid, humiliated and afraid of calling it that. Logan's shoulders lowered by a centimeter, as if air had finally returned to the room. At the head table, Margaret took the knife and faced the people she had kept in formation for decades. She looked at her sons, at her daughter, at the picture frame that waited to hold a past that would never be uncomplicated again. She spoke so only they could hear. "One true thing," she said, accepting the rule not as a gimmick, but as a ritual. "Elena, start." Elena swallowed, then let the sentence rise. "I have been strong in ways that made me cruel," she said. "I thought it was the only way to keep what Dad built and what he asked. I'm sorry." Logan closed his eyes. "I have been angry because it was easier than being scared," he said. "I am scared." Daniel's mouth twitched. His truth took longer, dragged out of him not by virtue, but by the impossibility of refusing his mother, when she finally looked at him not as an audience, but as a young. "I miss him," he said. The words were jagged. "And I don't know who I am without the fight." Margaret drew a breath that seemed to rearrange the bones beneath her dress. "I loved the picture more than the people in it," she said. "I thought they were the same thing. They are not." She cut a small, imperfect slice and held the plate out. Not to a camera, not to an investor. To Elena first. The band in the corner, who had stayed because it felt wrong to leave, began to play something without a name, soft enough not to interrupt the quiet pact taking shape. Mark stood with Sophie at the edge of the circle, not central and not invisible, exactly where you stand when your job is to steady the table, not own it. He felt Sophie's hand slip into his. "Is this what belonging looks like?" she whispered. "It's what it sounds like," he answered. "Truth and a little sugar." The sharp edges of the night softened after the press drifted away and the band shifted to a melody meant for breathing. Staff who had been poised for orders found themselves carrying plates and quiet kindness instead. Margaret cut second slices with a steadier hand, and the ritual of serving became a language no one had used in years. Logan took napkins down the row without being asked. Daniel stood at the perimeter, then eased one step closer, then another, as if gravity were a persuasion he couldn't quite refuse. Harris typed a terse update to PR postponed, private family dinner, then put the tablet face down and accepted a plate he hadn't expected to want. Later, in the emptied ballroom, Elena thanked Mark for staying. It wasn't grand or ceremonial. It was the kind of thank you give when you understand rescue can look like a stranger insisting on something gentle. Sophie leaned against her father's side, frosting at the corner of her mouth, eyes already memorizing the way this room sounded when no one was pretending. Days turned into a pattern that did not announce itself as destiny, only as habit that felt like relief. On Saturday mornings, the bell above Mark's bakery door chimed twice around 8:30, and Elena appeared in a sweater and flats, the armor of her weekday edges traded for something that allowed air to get in. She learned how to hold a piping bag without strangling it, how to rotate a turntable with the patience of a clockmaker, how to say almost as a compliment. Sophie declared herself quality control and created a grading rubric involving stickers and hug coupons. They washed bowls in the back sink with the sun slanting across stacked sheet pans, steam rising like a benediction over ordinary work. On a Wednesday that didn't need a reason, Elena drove them to a community garden plot behind the old conservatory where the city let people grow what they could carry home. The soil was a stubborn brown ribbon. They turned it with borrowed tools and laughter that stopped and started like a song with a new chorus. They planted a lemon tree in a half barrel because Sophie said the smell felt like clean beginnings. Margaret arrived with a straw hat and a pair of gloves she admitted were more fashion than function. She pushed them into the dirt anyway, and when her manicure surrendered, she laughed, unladylike and free. At the office, Elena made a different kind of room. The board delayed the vote. She brought in an independent chair and offered Logan a role he could say yes to without resenting it. Head of community partnerships, real work that bruised his knuckles less than the fight had. Daniel didn't take a title. He took a therapist's card Elena slid across a table with no lecture. He also took a seat at Sunday dinners and brought the kind of pie you buy when you can't bake and want to say sorry without words. Harris stopped speaking in headlines and started asking questions that had nouns like people and verbs like listen. The house where Elena lived in, curated quiet, began to accumulate signs of occupation that couldn't be mistaken for staging. A mug with a chip found the front of the cabinet. A piano in the formal room, which had been dusted more often than it had been played, started to know the weight of evening. After school, Sophie placed the matchbook from the bakery on the music stand for luck and put a candle in a jam jar on the lid. Elena's hands found middle C the way you find a friend from childhood at a reunion. Hesitant, then sure. Mark eased the stubborn squeak from the right pedal with a drop of oil and a patience that didn't announce itself. One night, as thunder stitched the sky, the three of them baked a simple dinner. Roast chicken, carrots caramelized at the edges, bread broken by hand, not sliced. Margaret arrived late with rain in her hem and the framed photograph from the ballroom tucked under her arm. She set it on the buffet and, without ceremony, replaced it with a new picture. The lemon tree in its barrel, 4 sets of hands muddy and proud, the skyline fuzzy with spring. Daniel stood in the doorway and didn't make a joke. Logan reached for a plate and set it at the table where his father's chair used to be, then placed a sprig of rosemary on the napkin as if blessing a space no one would fill and no one was trying to erase. They ate. They didn't take a photo. They let the sound of forks on plates and the piano breathing quietly in the next room carry the weight of being together. When the first cake they baked in that house cooled, they wrote with frosting what they had started by accident and then chosen on purpose. Not names, not titles, just the same 4 words that had survived a stormy night and 100 small decisions. For all of us. Elena rinsed the knife and dried it with a dish towel that had been embroidered by a grandmother who believed in linen and lessons. She looked at Mark across the kitchen island crowded with crumbs and grace and something that wasn't strategy, and she chose a sentence that didn't owe anything to optics. I want you here, she said, not as a symbol, as yourselves, as my people. Mark didn't answer right away. He had learned that some invitations deserved a breath in which to honor what they asked of you. Sophie solved the moment the way children do, with a truth too simple to be anything but right. She held both their hands and leaned in as if whispering a state secret. Can we call this home, she asked, if the lights are on even when we're not perfect? Elena bent and kissed the top of her head. Especially then, she said. The lemon tree took root. The piano learned a new song. The bakery's bell wrote their names in the air each Saturday and made a promise it could keep. And the family that had once auditioned for a picture began, quietly, to belong to the life that waited just beyond the frame. By the time spring pressed green against the city glass, the chandeliered ballroom had faded into a lesson, and the small flame that started it all had become a habit of light. Mornings tasted like coffee steam at the bakery and piano notes drifting down a hallway that no longer echoed. The lemon tree put out its first shy blossoms, citrus breath mingling with vanilla, as if the house itself remembered. Margaret learned to laugh without checking who was watching. Daniel arrived on Sundays with stories instead of strategies. Logan found purpose that didn't need a microphone. Harris stopped drafting narratives and started living one. Elena held the knife to cut a cake at her own kitchen counter and realized her hands were steady. Mark, who had once measured rescue in slices, measured it now in ordinary days that refused to be small. Sophie slept with frosting under her nails and a certainty beneath her ribs that belonging didn't require permission. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but a real beginning, the kind that grows only when truth is spoken aloud and shared at a table. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. And when the night feels heavy, light one candle, pass one plate, and start.